May 25th, 2020 began like any other day but ended as a pivotal moment in history. George Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, was accused of using a counterfeit $20 bill at a convenience store in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The situation escalated when police arrived at the scene and arrested Floyd. What should have been a routine arrest turned into a harrowing tragedy. Officer Derek Chauvin forced Floyd to the ground, pinning him with his knee on Floyd's neck. Despite Floyd repeatedly pleading, "I can't breathe," Chauvin did not relent. Floyd was held in this position for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, his cries for help ignored. Witnesses pleaded with the officers to let Floyd breathe, but their cries were brushed aside. This act of cruelty was captured on video by a bystander. Floyd's final moments, his pleas for his life, and the indifferent response of the police shook the world. His death wasn't just an isolated incident, it symbolized the systemic racism and police brutality that black communities have faced for generations. George Floyd's death became a rallying cry for justice. It wasn't just about one man, an entire community demanded accountability, equality, and the right to live without fear. This tragic day marked the beginning of a movement that would inspire millions across the globe to rise against injustice. The video of George Floyd's death, recorded by a bystander, was uploaded online and quickly went viral. Millions watched as Floyd pleaded for his life, repeating, "I can't breathe." The video was haunting and heart-wrenching, exposing the harsh realities of police brutality and systemic racism in the United States. As the video spread, so did the outrage. Social media platforms were flooded with messages condemning the incident. Hashtags like #Black Lives Matter, #Justice for George Floyd, and "I can't breathe" began trending worldwide. People from all walks of life, regardless of race or nationality, expressed anger and grief. In Minneapolis, protests erupted almost immediately. What started as a small gathering grew into a massive movement within days. Protesters held signs that read, "No justice, no peace, and stop killing us." The streets echoed with chants for justice and accountability. The outrage wasn't confined to the United States. Protests spread to cities worldwide, including London, Paris, Berlin, Sydney, and Tokyo. People of all races stood in solidarity, demanding an end to racial injustice and police violence. These demonstrations were not just about Floyd, but about decades of systemic oppression and the urgent need for change. Public figures, celebrities, and international leaders joined the outcry. Companies and organizations pledged their support for racial equality. Some even committed to reviewing their practices and policies. The video served as a wake-up call for the world, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about racism and privilege. The viral video did more than document a crime. It ignited a global movement. It became a symbol of black communities' collective pain and resilience, and a call to action for anyone who believed in justice and equality. The Black Lives Matter, BLM movement wasn't born in 2020. It began in 2013 after the acquittal of George Zimmerman, the man who killed Trayvon Martin, an unarmed black teenager. Founded by 3 black women, Alicia Garza, Patrice's Colors, and Opal Tomato, BLM started as a social media hashtag, but quickly became a global movement. By the time of George Floyd's death, BLM had already highlighted numerous cases of police brutality, systemic racism, and social injustice. However, Floyd's tragic death brought a new level of urgency and visibility to the movement. It became a unifying force for those who demanded change. BLM's core message is simple but powerful. Black Lives Matter. This isn't to diminish the value of other lives, but to emphasize that black lives, historically devalued and marginalized, deserve equal respect and protection. The movement addresses issues like police brutality, mass incarceration, economic inequality, and racial disparities in education and healthcare. It seeks to dismantle systems perpetuating discrimination and replace them with structures ensuring equality and justice. Floyd's death acted as a catalyst for BLM to reach unprecedented heights. The protests were more significant, widespread, and diverse than ever. People from different racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds joined hands to demand systemic change. BLM's impact wasn't just felt on the streets. It influenced politics, media, and corporate practices. Discussions about defunding the police, reforming criminal justice systems, and addressing systemic racism became central to public discourse. The movement forced individuals and institutions to confront their roles in perpetuating inequality and to commit to meaningful change. The protests that erupted after George Floyd's death were unlike anything the world had seen in recent history. What began as a local outcry in Minneapolis quickly became a global movement, transcending borders, languages, and cultures. People from all walks united to demand justice, accountability, and systemic change. In the days following Floyd's death, the streets of Minneapolis were flooded with protesters carrying signs that read, "Black Lives Matter, no justice, no peace, and I can't breathe." The atmosphere was a mix of anger, grief, and determination. Communities that had long felt the weight of systemic oppression now had a platform to express their pain and demand change. As the protests grew, the message spread beyond Minneapolis. Demonstrations were held in all 50 states and over 60 countries worldwide within weeks. In London, protesters gathered in Trafalgar Square, chanting for justice. In Paris, thousands marched in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, holding signs that called for an end to racism and police brutality. The message was the same in Berlin, Sydney, Toronto, and Tokyo. Enough is enough. These protests were diverse and inclusive, with people of all races and ethnicities standing together. The sight of young and old, black and white, marching side by side was a testament to the universal desire for justice. Families brought their children to teach them the importance of equality. Activists shared their stories of resilience, and allies amplified the voices of the marginalized. The protests weren't just about marching. In many cities, they included silence lasting 8 and 46 seconds, during which Officer Derek Chauvin knelt on George Floyd's neck. These moments were solemn and powerful, a stark reminder of the pain and injustice that sparked the movement. The demonstrations also led to meaningful conversations about the role of police in society. Calls to defund the police gained traction, advocating for reallocating funds to education, healthcare, and community support systems. Protesters demanded that systemic racism be addressed, not just through words but through meaningful reforms. Despite the largely peaceful nature of the protests, there were moments of tension. In some cities, clashes occurred between protesters and law enforcement. Tear gas, rubber bullets, and mass arrests became common, further highlighting the very issues of police violence that protesters were fighting against. These scenes only strengthened the resolve of those demanding change. The global scale of the protest was unprecedented. From small towns in America to bustling metropolises worldwide, people took to the streets to say that racism and injustice could no longer be ignored. The protest became a symbol of hope and resistance, proving that collective action has the power to challenge even the most entrenched systems. By the end of 2020, the protests had achieved more than just raising awareness. They had sparked tangible changes, from police reforms in several cities to a broader reckoning with systemic racism across institutions. The movement inspired individuals and communities to fight for a more just and equitable world. Facebook and TikTok became powerful tools for spreading awareness, organizing protests, and amplifying marginalized voices. The digital age allowed the message of Black Lives Matter to transcend borders and reach millions in real time. The video of George Floyd's death, recorded by a bystander, was uploaded to social media within hours. Its circulation was rapid and widespread, drawing attention to the horrifying incident in a way that traditional media could not have achieved alone. The hashtags #Justice for George Floyd and I Can't Breathe began trending within hours, uniting people in grief and outrage. These hashtags acted as rallying cries, creating a sense of urgency and solidarity across the globe. Social media allowed individuals to share their personal experiences with racism and police brutality, giving the movement a profoundly human and relatable perspective. Stories of injustice that had once been silenced were now being told on a massive scale. Viral posts highlighted not just George Floyd's case, but also the names and stories of other victims of racial violence, such as Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and Tamir Rice. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok became hubs for education and activism, Infographics, videos, and articles explaining systemic racism, police brutality, and ways to take action flooded users' feeds. People shared petitions, donation links, and protest schedules, making it easier for individuals to contribute to the cause. Celebrities and influencers used their platforms to amplify the movement, while everyday users contributed by sharing resources and engaging in meaningful discussions. Twitter in particular became a real-time source of information. Protesters used it to share updates, alert others about police activity, and spread messages of hope and resistance. Hashtags like We're showing Defund the Police and Russia and Black Lives Matter kept the conversation alive, ensuring that the movement's momentum did not fade. Social media was also instrumental in holding those in power accountable. Videos and images from protests exposed instances of police violence, often contradicting official statements. This transparency fueled public outrage and demanded justice not just for Floyd, but for all victims of systemic racism. The digital movement wasn't without challenges. Misinformation, performative allyship, and algorithmic suppression posed obstacles, but activists worked tirelessly to counter these issues. Campaigns like Blackout Tuesday, where users posted black squares on Instagram to show solidarity, received mixed reactions, with some criticizing them as a distraction from actionable activism. However, these debates highlighted the importance of moving beyond symbolic gestures to tangible change. Ultimately, social media proved to be a double-edged sword, but its impact on the movement was undeniable. It connected people across the globe, turning individual acts of protest into a collective demand for justice. Social media transformed the tragedy of George Floyd's death into a catalyst for change, proving that in the digital age, united voices can create an unstoppable force. George Floyd's tragic death has left an indelible mark on the world, not just as a moment of deep sorrow, but as a catalyst for profound social and political change. While his life was tragically cut short, his legacy is one of transformation, of a movement that has inspired millions to confront racism and demand justice. The days, weeks, and months following Floyd's death were filled with protests, political discourse, and a renewed commitment to fighting systemic racism. His death sparked an ongoing conversation about the need for police reform, the dismantling of institutionalized racism, and the importance of racial equality. This was not just a momentary uproar. It has become a movement that continues to shape how we think about justice in America and worldwide. One of the most significant impacts of George Floyd's death was the global push for police reform. Calls to defund the police grew louder, with activists advocating for the reallocation of funds from police departments to social services, education, and community programs. These demands were not about abolishing law enforcement entirely, but rather reimagining what safety and justice could look like, investing in prevention, de-escalation, and community support instead of perpetuating systems of violence and control. In the aftermath of Floyd's death, many cities took significant steps toward addressing police misconduct. In Minneapolis, the city council pledged to dismantle the police department and explore alternative forms of public safety. Other cities, such as Los Angeles and New York, announced reforms like banning chokeholds and revising use-of-force policies. While the effectiveness and scope of these changes vary, the movement brought the conversation about police accountability to the forefront of national discourse. Beyond police reform, Floyd's death catalyzed a broader reckoning with the history of racial inequality. Statues commemorating figures with ties to slavery and racism were torn down, and schools, institutions, and corporations began reassessing their role in perpetuating racial injustice. Many companies issued public statements denouncing racism and pledged to increase diversity and inclusion within their ranks. For the first time in years, companies were held accountable for their actions and their silence on racial issues. Floyd's legacy also manifested in the political realm. In the 2020 presidential election, discussions around racial justice became central to political campaigns, with candidates facing pressure to take clear stances on addressing systemic racism. The Black Lives Matter movement and the protests following Floyd's death played a significant role in mobilizing voters, especially younger generations who were determined to make their voices heard at the polls. The movement became a defining issue of the election, with many seeing it as a moral referendum on the nation's state. Moreover, George Floyd's legacy is carried forward by his family and the many activists who continue to work tirelessly for justice. His brother, Philanese Floyd, and others in his family have become vocal advocates for reform, using their platform to push for change. Through their efforts, Floyd's death has not only been recognized as a symbol of injustice, but also as a powerful call to action, a call that refuses to be silenced. While George Floyd's death is a tragedy, it has also ignited a fire for justice and equality that continues to burn brightly. His name is now etched in the hearts and minds of millions as a reminder of what is at stake: the fight for justice, the end of systemic racism, and the recognition of the dignity and worth of every human life. The Black Lives Matter movement, inspired by his death, has become a global force, and the quest for justice is far from over. The legacy of George Floyd lives on, not just in protest, but in the work of those who continue to demand a better, more just world. Section 7. Moving Forward. The future of the movement and the path to change. The tragic death of George Floyd ignited a powerful wave of activism and change, but the fight for racial justice and equality is far from over. While significant strides have been made in raising awareness and addressing systemic issues, the movement's future requires continued effort, commitment, and collective action. As we look ahead, the path to real change will not be easy, but it is a path that must be walked by individuals, communities, governments, and institutions alike. One of the key challenges moving forward is ensuring that the momentum of the Black Lives Matter movement does not fade away. History has shown that social movements often face periods of stagnation after the initial outcry. However, this time, the demand for justice is different. The Black Lives Matter movement has grown into a global force that is more connected, organized, and determined than ever before. Activists, especially younger generations, continue pushing for concrete changes, holding governments and institutions accountable for their actions or inactions. These voices cannot be silenced. They must continue to advocate for change in every sphere of society. Education is one area that requires significant transformation. For lasting change to occur, we must shift how we educate people about the history of racism, its impacts, and how it continues to affect Black communities today. Schools, universities, and workplaces must include comprehensive lessons about systemic racism, privilege, and inequality to foster a more just and empathetic society. These lessons can help dismantle stereotypes and encourage understanding while equipping individuals with the tools to take action against racism in their daily lives. Policymakers and lawmakers must continue to prioritize police reform, not just through cosmetic changes, but by enacting laws that genuinely protect Black communities and other marginalized groups. The fight for justice must include a shift in how law enforcement interacts with the public, emphasizing de-escalation, accountability, and the reduction of violence. This means instituting better training programs for police officers, ensuring that officers are held accountable for abuses of power, and creating independent review boards to investigate misconduct. However, police reform is just one part of the larger puzzle. Economic inequality, access to quality health care, and educational disparities must also be addressed. The Black community in the United States has faced historical disenfranchisement in all of these areas, and systemic barriers remain deeply entrenched. The movement for racial justice must push for policies that provide equitable access to resources and opportunities, such as better education, healthcare, housing, and employment opportunities. Moreover, the role of allyship in this movement is crucial. While the Black Lives Matter movement was born out of the pain and struggle of Black communities, it has also been sustained by a diverse group of allies committed to fighting for equality. This movement requires individuals from all racial and ethnic backgrounds to examine their own biases, acknowledge their privileges, and take responsibility for standing up against injustice. Actual change will only come when allies actively listen, learn, and use their privilege to support those who have been oppressed. Finally, the movement's future lies in the arts, culture, and media. The images, videos, and stories shared during the protests have clarified that the Black experience cannot be ignored. From film to music, literature to visual arts, creators are using their platforms to highlight Black communities' struggles and challenge the narratives that perpetuate racism. As these stories reach new audiences, they play a pivotal role in shaping cultural consciousness and inspiring future generations to carry the torch of justice. While the road to systemic change is long, it is not impossible. The Black Lives Matter movement has already achieved a great deal in raising awareness, prompting critical conversations, and demanding accountability. But the actual test lies in how we, as a global community, continue to challenge racism, fight for equality, and ensure that George Floyd's death is not just a moment in history, but a turning point that leads to lasting change. The movement will face challenges, setbacks, and resistance in the future. However, the call for justice will not be silenced. George Floyd's name will forever be a symbol of the struggle for racial equality, but his death has also fueled a generation determined to ensure that Black lives matter, not just in the moment, but in the future. The path to change is long, but with continued dedication and collective action, a world of justice, equality, and freedom for all is within reach. Section 8. The fight continues. How you can make a difference. The Black Lives Matter movement has brought about significant awareness and progress, but the fight for racial justice and equality is ongoing. While large-scale protests, social media campaigns, and political discourse have shifted the conversation, the future of racial equality depends on individual actions and collective efforts. Every person has a role to play in dismantling systemic racism, challenging injustice, and ensuring that Black lives are valued and protected. One of the most immediate ways to make a difference is through education. Understanding the history of racism, its present-day manifestations, and how systems of oppression function is key to becoming an effective ally. This means reading books, watching documentaries, and conversing about race. By educating yourself, you can challenge your biases and better understand the experiences of those who face discrimination. It's essential to move beyond surface-level knowledge and dive deep into the complexities of racial issues, such as the history of slavery, the impact of Jim Crow laws, and the modern-day effects of policies like mass incarceration. Furthermore, listening to and amplifying the voices of those most affected by racism is crucial. Creating space for Black voices in activism, art, or everyday life is essential. Support Black creators, authors, artists, and activists by sharing their work, attending events, and donating to causes fighting racial justice. Listening to the stories of those who have experienced racial injustice helps build empathy, understanding, and solidarity. Another powerful tool for change is advocacy. Use your voice to speak out against racism and inequality in all areas of life, whether in your community, workplace, or online. Advocate for policies that promote equity in education, healthcare, employment, and criminal justice. Lobby for changes in the legal system that protect marginalized communities and demand accountability for police misconduct. Support organizations fighting for reform and contribute your time, resources, or skills to causes dedicated to racial justice. Voting is another key way to ensure that the fight for justice continues. Elections significantly impact policies related to policing, education, housing, and healthcare. By voting, you help decide who is in power and which issues are prioritized. It's crucial to educate yourself about candidates' positions on racial justice and make informed decisions when casting your vote. Participating in local elections is just as important as national ones, as local government decisions directly affect the lives of Black communities. Additionally, practicing allyship in your everyday life can make a profound impact. When you witness acts of racism, whether they occur in the workplace, in public spaces, or online, take a stand. Speak out against discriminatory language and behavior, and support those who are being targeted. Being an ally means actively challenging racism, even when it's uncomfortable. It's essential to recognize that racism is not just an issue for Black people to fight, it is an issue for all of us to address. Creating an inclusive environment in your community or workplace is another way to contribute to the movement. Encourage diversity and representation in all spaces through hiring practices, education, or media. Support initiatives that provide opportunities for marginalized communities to succeed and thrive. Whether donating to scholarship funds or supporting Black-owned businesses, Your actions can help level the playing field and create a more equitable society. Lastly, stay engaged and persistent. The road to justice is long and challenging, but it's important to remember that change happens incrementally. It's easy to get discouraged by setbacks, but every effort, no matter how small, contributes to the more significant movement. Continue to educate yourself, stand up against injustice, support Black communities, and hold systems of power accountable. This is how we create lasting change. Fighting racial equality will require dedication, resilience, and collective action. By committing to the cause, you are helping to ensure that George Floyd's legacy is one of lasting justice, equality, and a future where Black lives truly matter. Together, we can dismantle the systems of oppression that have harmed Black communities for centuries and build a world where racial justice is a reality for everyone. This is the final section of the story. With continued dedication and active participation, the justice movement will keep growing, inspiring future generations to carry the torch of change forward.